Hello, and welcome to the Cram session. This Cram session is for informative speaking, which is for the public speaking courses only. So that's what we're going to be covering here for this Cram session. Just a reminder, Cram sessions, I'm deciding to try it this semester, and if I'll probably use the same video other semesters. Where is the morning of the day before. So if it's on your speech is on Tuesday, then Monday morning I will be posting videos. You know, that's how it works, right? So the morning before the eve of the speech that morning. All right, so this cram session will be covering a couple things that it is needed, and we covered the last couple weeks to set up for this affirmative speech. Just a reminder, and for some people who miss speeches some days and so forth. So this is why I set it up, and things like this. As always, you can contact me through Canvas and set up meetings and so forth, or talk to me in class, or if we are on meeting on Zoom, we can meet in breakout rooms and stuff like that, or after class, things of that nature. All right, so we're going to be covering in this video for the formative speech, the feedback from the last speech, some general things you can look on your first speech, the topic selection, speech patterns that you're choosing, going over the general idea of informative speaking, and then the two new things for this speech, because you're using the same outline, same evaluation, same structure, all that stuff. Two new things were references and the PowerPoint. All right. So or Google Slides, whatever you use. You want to use one of those two. All right. All right. So let's get back into it. So feedback. Here are some just general things that I notice with what happens in a lot of speeches. First off, when it comes to introduction, you need to some students needed to reread what the intro sections are doing. The attention getter is kind of lead people in, doesn't jump right into the topic, kind of like an analogy gives an example of something they know of and a comparison to what you're talking about. The background is just background on the topic you're about to talk about, the thesis. It's like saying this is my topic essentially, but a little bit better that way. Audience relevance, why the audience should listen, why should they pay attention, why them, the speaker credibility, why you, why should they listen to you? Thesis is exactly how it sounds, should be direct, a direct statement. It's in between, as I said in class, in between a pitch, a slogan, and a more declarative sentence, a very direct statement, and then the preview main points. And so it's like a roadmap, right? Those are the three sections, and students just need to read them, and they are just for setup. And that was another common thing was no making points. Save it for your main points. No making points. You're not trying to prove anything and so forth. That was a common thing. Overall in the speeches, a couple of things, make sure you use transitions, your signposting, your transitions, because there's two phrases I use: merged and get lost. I'm got lost and get lost. I always say get lost, got lost. When you hear merge, that means the audience knew that there were two distinct things, either intro sections or most of the time main points. They knew there were two distinct things there, but you had no separation. There was no transition. There was just merged together. So we know there's two distinct things, but it merged together. And so transitions really help on that. And the other one is got lost. And a got lost is like this, but just mixed in. Everything's just gobbledygook. And if you got that comment, again, transitions and more clarity. Another thing that I said to some folks was use the MP structure. Remember, you're not doing a grocery list when you're in the MPs, your main points. You're not doing a grocery list. You're not just naming off stuff. You are This camera's bouncing around because my dog is bouncing around over there. You are not, you can hear patter of feet. All right. You are not listing off a bunch of stuff. There's a structure to them. You have a summary that tells your audience what the main point is about. And then the two things you're going to be focusing on in that main point, the sub point A, sub point B. That's where your meat and potatoes are. And when you have that structure there, you avoid the merging, you avoid getting lost, and so forth. Let's see, make sure you are, in this speech, you're gonna have to say your citations and so forth. The last speech you didn't, so some of you did not. Don't read off speeches. That's why you use the cue cards. That's why you use those cards, because you would take notes or keywords and that's it. You're not doing anything else. You're not reading off a speech. Don't do additional work. Some of the things I mentioned were pertaining to that, like you didn't do your, you didn't follow the structure, the past, present, future, and so forth. While that might have been for that speech, you should take that in consideration for this speech and this third speech, because you need to follow the directions. And always reminders, there's always something about my speeches that I do to prevent people from taking a speech off the internet and cramming it into this speech. So make sure you follow the directions, all right? And so some of the comments there were maybe pertaining to that particular speech, but it's relevant for this one. And then time issues, explanations, elaboration, and this one, citation, things to fill it in and so forth. If you've gone too long, make sure you use the timekeepers to manage your time. That way you know where you're going and so forth. Yes, just lay around all day and now you're deciding to do stuff. Sorry, it's my dog. So yeah, I think that's a thing. Your intro should be like a minute and a half, not even a minute and a half, a minute, 15 seconds, and so forth. Let's see. Trying to think of any other general things I said to folks. I think that's pretty much it for right there. You have your individual things. Transitions are A to B directions, where you're telling your audience, I just talked about this, now I'm going to talk about that. You're not, right? You're not making points in it. You're just directing your audience. I just talked about this. Now I'm going to talk about that. That's essentially it. All right, let's get into what you're going to be doing in this speech, and that is giving an informative speech. And so there's the topic selection. Now you're supposed to post your topics in the intro, in the discussions where you can see other people's topics. You can't repeat topics. You can't have the topic be connected to your first speech. Remember that. But yeah, so see, and all the regulations and rules and what speeches you can do is right there. It tells you what speeches are banned. Some of the banned speeches are anything that debate facts. We're not here, conspiracy theory type stuff. Anything that is argumentative, this is an informative speech. So anything that naturally goes into debate, no. Anything that's too minute, where there's no real research there, nothing to really talk about, you gotta avoid that kind of stuff. And then there's some topics that I'm just either tired of listening to them, or I just can't fairly give a grade on. So some of the banned topics are COVID, because we're tired of COVID, and cartels, serial killers. And then the one that I banned because I can't give a fair grade to it anymore is the circumcision speeches. So anything else, perfectly fine as long as it fits into the informative type thing. Remember, anything that's a little bit sensitive, I've given my inclusion speech on and how to talk about stuff and so forth. Just be aware that those types of topics are going to be a little bit more difficult to do, and you run the risk of getting points. So if you're going to do a speech on, like an informative speech on what a sex worker is or anything like that, if you're thinking of that kind of, topic to kind of, woo, You should also know that it puts you at risk for losing points just because you forget to give a warning on certain things and stuff like that. So those are the topics. You will find more information in the discussion. The outline also covers what topics are banned and so forth. So assignment pages, outline, or go to the discussion where you post the speeches. All right. Um, there are the speech patterns. I'm going to go to share screen real quick. Here's a nice little gem. The outline. Remember, the outline is found in files. It's found in files, a Word document or PDF. Ooh, excuse me. Anyways, that's all found in files. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because I want you to find it. It's the same outline as before. All three speeches have the same outline. So nothing had changed. But the big change here is the first speech you had a chronological speech, past, present, future. Your main points is where you find the speech pattern, main point one, main point two, main point three. And so just to give you just a quick rundown of these speech patterns, let's cover up the things I need. Where's the eraser? Oh, there it is. Just remember, there's the four speech patterns you could choose from. The first one is topical. Topical is awesome. It's the most flexible. It's the most used. It's essentially you get to choose your own adventure. And so you get to decide 1, 2, and 3. Now, here's a couple rules on using topical. Topical means that the three main points are the ones you find most topical of the subject, right? So if you're doing an informative speech on, I'll use one of the banned speech, serial killers, the different, generalization of serial killers out there, 1, 2, and 3. And so things that are big about it. Here's a couple rules about it. Remember, there's a different types of topical. If you it's matters what you think is most important. The most important, if it's you want to get it off your chest first, you put the most important number 1. If you want to save it best for last, you put it number 3. You never put the most important number 2. Then there's the simple to complex, where it's like the basic to the more complex, right? The example I always use is, of course, Legos. You were talking about Lego collections, the small sets, the medium sets, the adult, 18 and over, more complicated sets, the expensive sets. That is a simple complex. There's one other thing on topical to help you navigate it, because the flexibility gives you a lot of room to move around, but you don't want to move where it doesn't create a story, doesn't create a narrative. So, for example, if you were doing that serial killer speech and the first 2 points were types generalization of serial killers, and then the third one is how law enforcement handles them, it's not really giving a story. If you're talking about types for 2 of them, then naturally inclined to use types for the third one, right? There's a natural story to it. And so if your main points, your things you want to talk about is you want to talk about this type of thing, and then all of a sudden something random, or it's all 3 are random. There should be some kind of story, some kind of connection to them in a way. So example, if you're doing a speech on different types of type of food, you would have a the different regions where you can find the foods, or if you're maybe main ingredients, or I'm sorry, just the history of the food, for example. Well, no, that's just chronological, but you understand there's some kind of narrative that doesn't fit the other speech patterns. And I just sometimes what students do with topical is they'll just have 2 that are kind of the same, and then all of a sudden some random stuff. And you just want to avoid that. You want to have the story. But if you were looking for storytelling, the other 3 naturally fit into them. The most popular one of those 3 natural storytellers, because remember, these speech patterns are all speech patterns you use in everyday life, right? How you talk. And one of them is to tell a story in chronological order. So if you're doing a historical thing about, let's see, the history, we we just had we're having problems with Russia. So the history of the Soviet Union, you would have the revolution, the outreach, the growth of it, and then the collapse, right? I have them by letters. The revolution, the growth, and then the collapse, right? How it's a chronological speech. And the first thing that happened with the Soviet Union is its founding based on the Bolshevik Revolution. And then there's the growth of it, starting in Russia and Moscow and working his way to taking up all of Russia and then a lot of the states around it. And then even growing outside of it by finding allies in China, Cuba, Vietnam, North Korea, and so forth. That is what you'd be talking about. That's the growth. And then finally, the decline, the collapse of it, the Afghanistan war, the financial collapse, the corruption, and when tyrannies fall, and lots of different things. But it's a story. Another story that you tell is that's a historical story, right? Remember, you can't repeat past, present, future, but you can do past, present, and so forth, right? It's historical record. It has to be in that order. Another order is how to do things. I could complain about IKEA because I had to build something in IKEA this weekend. Oh, that's so bad. But it's like if you were doing how to bake a cake, you would do, the ingredients, the prep, and then the cooking, right? That's how you bake it. It's in that order. So order, and the order is by time. That's chronological. It's all time. The ingredients come first in the time, in the path of time. The next is, of course, preparation, and then finally the cooking. Another speech pattern is spatial. Spatial is the most complicated, and you tend to stay away from it. But it's the same thing as chronological, but instead of time, it's physical location. So example of this is a road trip. A road trip is you start in this city, and then you went to this city, and then you went to that city. You went to this country, then you went to that country, then you went to this country. You went to this part of the city, you went to that part of the city, and then you went to part of that city. You could have taken that trip over a week, a couple months, or whatever. You spend 3 months here, 1 month here. Doesn't matter. What connects it is the physical location and in the order that you go through it, from point A to point B, essentially. Another example of spatial is order, again, physical location. Your book uses cellular structure, but I always say the castle is the best example of this, meaning the outside wall, the outside of the wall, and then finally inside the wall, right? If you were talking about the structure castle, you're going to the castle. You would be obviously outside the wall. You would then go into the wall area and then finally inside the castle. Spatial, physical location. The final one is cause and effect. This one is a little bit precarious. Kind of stay away from because it naturally tends to go to persuasion, but it's still something to talk about. A good example of this is if you explain something that has happened, and so you're just giving kind of an account of how things occur. So if you were talking about something, right? Or if you're talking about the bubonic plague or something like that, you would talk about, density of the cities. You would talk about the spread, through trade of the disease through trade routes, and then finally the plague hitting Europe, right? Stuff like that. So you're not saying anything is right or wrong, but you're just giving an account how something occurred. That's essentially the speech patterns. But the one thing about these speech patterns is they all have to be informative. Informative, oh, I can get out of the stop share. Informative, this is very important. Informative is when you are giving a speech and Um, and the speech is nothing but you're telling a story. You're telling us, I'm sorry, story about a subject. You're not telling anybody to change their minds or telling something is better or they got to do something. And you're not giving judgment to anything. You are just talking about something and informing them about it. The best example of an informative speech that you do in everyday life is when you are talking to your friends about different restaurant options when you go out or different movies that are playing. You're not telling them which movies to go to, you're just saying which ones are out there. That's it. And so it's again, no judgment, nothing where you're trying to persuade. And that's a problem with some of the subject students choose. They choose stuff that is they like. And so they naturally have a tendency to give judgmental language on. And so you want to, avoid things like benefits. You want to avoid things in a negative light or something like that, or things like that. You just want to report on what's going on with something. And so that's the thing. You want to avoid persuasive language. And that's what trips people up. You can lose points that way. I'm trying to think, there's something else about the informative. I want to say avoid anything that is naturally tend to want to argue or things of that like that. If I remember it, I'll come back to it, and so forth. Okay, let's go. Let me get into that. Now, let's see. You want to avoid. Okay. Oh, I got there. Okay. You want to avoid judgmental language and stuff like that and topics. I'm forgetting something. I don't want to forget it. Yeah, choose the topics, informative. Um, we'll move on, and if I remember it, it's obviously not important if I forget. There's the references. Now that was a big change from last one. Last one you had to do a community a culture reference that's from you, right? And you had to pronounce it in your speech. That was a trainer. What you're doing now. And the big thing that you're doing now is you're researching, finding a reference from somewhere else. This speech, the minimum is only 2. It used to be 3, but after the pandemic and everything, I reduced it to 2. Recommend 3, 1 for each of your sections. But you want to have that kind of you want that outside information. We went through all the different avenues to get information, what's right, what's wrong. That's from the lecture. Your book covers it as well. But essentially, you're just trying to find references that are citable. Now, again, APA, minimum 2 references for the speech, recommend 3. But APA citation, most classes are APA, just FYI. And I showed you through the reference research workshop, which, by the way, this video links to my YouTube channel. And the research workshop from previous classes, online only classes, is posted. So you can find lots of old content that might help you in your current research. And I cover how to do this stuff in those things. Now, let's go over this stuff here. I showed you this stuff right here, right? So I showed you, like, I'm going to put COVID up there. I showed you COVID. Let's see. Let's talk about long. And then I also even explained how not can exclude information you don't want. So United States. Ooh, not. Now I'm going to be worried that I'm going to be misspelling. United. Oops. Long COVID. Yeah, we'll keep it there. So this is done through the library database. You can find it by going Google. I always recommend Googling ELAC library database. You can go to the ELAC library and click on find articles, and the database is one of the options. But I always Google, and then I go, and also you can get it through Canvas. You scroll down on the left and all the different options. Library is one of them. Now, as for the password, I'm not in charge of that. You have to contact, they'll tell you where to contact if you don't know it. So I'm going to click on this and see how many articles we get. By the way, the not excludes information. So I'm trying to find information about long COVID um, or long-term care um, outside the United States. That's why I excluded the United States. So you can click on it. There's lots of little things, the research workshop, but I just want to show you something that's very important. You click on one of these articles. By the way, journals are the best option. And what you need to do is, the abstract tells you what the article is about. You can find the full text on the article on the left-hand side there, either PDF or HTML. And then, but this is the most important thing. This little thing on the right-hand side saying cite, and it gives you the citation for APA. You copy and paste it onto the reference page. So there's no excuses not to find APA because, and the reason why you want to use a library database is the library database is safe. You know that you're going to find sources there that are citable, that are not questionable, and so forth, especially if you academic journals. So you find the best sources, you have a great search engine available to you, and then finally, it does the citation for you. Just copy and paste it. Go look at the research workshop if you need more information on how to do research and all that stuff. But we got to move on. I'm trying to think of if there's anything else I miss on the informative. Be neutral. Don't try to persuade. Don't try to use judgmental language. I think that's pretty much it. The last thing we talked about was PowerPoint. The PowerPoint workshop, again, old videos are on my YouTube page. You can look for stuff there. But actually, just remember my slides. You can see some slides and pages and so forth. I have, oh, let me go back to references real quick. I said it multiple times in class. Whenever you cite in your speech, that means when you say your facts out loud, you want to use two words. One of them is according, and the other one is in. So according to the New York Times, in the Wall Street Journal, according to The Economist, in the New England Journal of Medicine, according to a study done by the University of Pittsburgh, in a USC study done by the Political Science Division. See how that works? You let your audience know you're about to drop some knowledge by citing the sources. And the best way to start into the sources, according, in. Those are the two words that start the process. Okay, so PowerPoints. Went through the research workshop. You can find information on the YouTube page as well. But look at my slides in my class. I have the same kind of motif theme to it. It's very basic. I don't have that too much stuff. You don't want to put like whole sentences there. You don't want to put a paragraph of stuff. You just want a basic slide, basic information and stuff like that. Not too many images, not too much stuff. I showed you like the worst PowerPoints as well. So those are ways you want to do that, okay? A couple of things to remember, the hardcore numbers, especially for the final. The most slides that you can have are 5. The minimum you can have is 3. 5 slides, 3 slides is the minimum. So 5 is the most, 3 is the thing. And if you notice, 5 is the same amount of sections you have, and 3 is the amount of main points you have. So most of the time, students usually use 3 or 4. 3 because they have one for each main point, and then the fourth one is the first one, and it's like a title card, and that's it. So that way, when they're giving their intro, they're standing in front of like a title card, and then that goes into the 3 main points. So usually, not rarely do I ever have a student make a slide for a conclusion. You do not need a title. You do not need a reference page. slide. You don't need your references on the slide. You can have your cited facts in the slides for the main points, but again, nothing too complicated, nothing too distracting, not a bunch of images and all that stuff. Let's see, 3 to 5 slides. And then remember what I said about font variation. Font variation is anytime you change the fonts. If you make them bigger, smaller, on the same page, Um, either on the slide or like a flyer or a poster on the same page. Anytime you change the fonts, you change the font type, the size, the color, underline, and so forth. I call that a variation, right? A variation. The most you should have when it comes to variations on one slide, on one flyer, on one poster is 3. And the reason why is the more you have on there, the more eye strain you'll be putting on your audience because they got to focus in and out every time there's a change in the font. And that comes from a person in public relations longer than most of you have been alive. I'm not talking about me, but I'm up there. And then the other one is if you like overall in your PowerPoints and all the different PowerPoints, you shouldn't have more than 5 variation because it's just too, again, you want to have consistency. You want to have them know that you are talking about the same thing and so forth. So just remember that. Also remember that the font color and the background should not bleed into each other or you can't read it, should not blend and all that stuff. So just those are some basics on that. So you're giving an informative speech. Again, it's just a basic speech where you're just talking about stuff. You're not saying anything judgmentally. Remember, I said before, it's just like telling everybody all the different restaurant options, all the different movie options. That's all it is. So yeah, that's it. Um, I think that's everything. This has been a long week into a long weekend. So yes, if anything else, I'll just write it in notes on the announcement. So this is Cram session. And if you need further help, you can contact me through Canvas, or you can follow the link into my YouTube page. You can find old videos, even a video of me jumping out of a plane. So have a good one and see you on speech day. I got to do this properly. Where's the record button? There we go.